the origin of the Latin alphabet is can be, and the genealogy of the Latin alphabet can be described in this way: from the Greek alphabet to the Etruscan alphabet, finally to the Latin alphabet. Okay, then we saw some of the feature of this writing system. I don't want to spend too much words on that, but as we said, in the origin of this writing system, there is a fact that it was used small elite, and that this elite used mainly for official purposes, like, for example, inscription that was to be exposed to the public. So it has this kind of monumental style, and it is a writing system where every letter is detached from the other letters, so it cannot be classified as a cursive. And also the main characteristic is the fact that letters are aligned inside the system defined by two lines. We call this a two-line system. So for us, the two-line system defines the base of what we call capital letters. We will see that the minuscule, or the lowercase, as we call using a typographic term, is characterized by a four-line system. But for now, we stay with our two-line system. We call these two lines in this way. There is a base line, sometimes is shortened as BL, and we see a capital line, or cap. It is on Classroom, this one. You can access it. Okay, yeah, I will show you. Yeah. So, so we have the baseline and the capital line of cap 8. And all the letters of all the capital letters are inscribed in this system, with the exception of Q. As you know, Q has a tail that goes below the baseline, okay? But other letters stay inside this system of two lines. Maybe another exception sometimes is L, that goes above the capital 8. We find examples with the L raised above the capital 8. But, by the way, these are exceptions to the general rule. Okay, so we describe this with one. We have a two-line system. Okay. Then we have two. A tendency toward a certain kind of geometrization. Okay, in this case, the tendency is the important word, because as we have yet to see, but we can say this, that these letters were not designed with geometrical tools like a compass and so on. So they cannot be reduced to perfect circles and so on and so on. They cannot be constructed by geometrical means. But anyway, there is a certain tendency toward this kind of geometrization. For example, we see that letters like L, E, F, etc., 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 form a right angle. Okay, so straight lines are verticals and horizontals, with the exception, obviously, of letters like A, V, and K, probably, and Z. Yes. By the way, in general, they have this very square tendency. Sometimes these capitals are described as capitalis quadrata, that in Latin means capital letter, squared capital letters. Okay, so we saw that these two points here are characteristics of the later development of the Latin capitals. We can say that more or less toward the 3rd and 2nd century before Christ, the Roman writing goes toward this normalization process. And we can so describe the so-called epigraphic capitals. Now, no, sorry. No. Okay. So what we said define the epigraphic capitals. Now, with the term epigraphy, we mean two things. Epigraphy is the study of writing made on durable material, art material, and epigraphy is also the writing itself made on durable and hard materials. So when you see an inscription, it can be described as an epigraphy. Okay. I will use the term epigraphic capitals to distinguish these capitals from other kinds of capitals that we will see. Okay. We can also describe two phases. One is conventionally referred as Republican, capitals. Okay. Here, Republican refers to the Roman Republic. That lasted until the death of Caesar. Then Rome became an empire, meaning that the Republican form was substituted by an emperor. Okay, so and we describe imperial capitals. A typical example of imperial capitals is the Trajan inscription it is the Trajan inscription that we saw last time, but we will see this again. Okay, so let's go to our Okay, this is an example. We have seen it. This is an example of Republican capitals. One can already see this process of regularization, of systematization, and the perfect alignment inside this two-line system, the tendency toward what we have called geometrization. If you look at letter L, here you can see the right angle at the base, while in previous examples, this is a reconstruction, but it is faithful to the archaic Old Latin. You can see that the L as an acute angle, but when we go toward this process of regularization, we can see this tendency toward a more rigorous construction. Then we saw another example of Republican capitals. We can describe as in this way, not because there is something linked to the state form, or a republic or empire, but because it is useful as a historical divide between these two periods. So we use this term Republican and imperial just to have a point of reference for a periodization. So we described these, and then we saw the example of the Trajan column inscription. Essentially, the shapes are the same. Here we are in the 1st century after Christ, so we already are inside the imperial period of Rome. After the death of Julius Caesar, Rome became an empire, first with Augustus, that proclaimed himself as an emperor, and then with the other emperor that followed. And Trajan was one of them. So we saw that essentially the shapes are the same of previous examples. But looking at this inscription and obviously other inscription on the same period, we see something that changed and that is useful for us in terms of what we will see in typography. So we described these two other points in imperial capitals as contrast and serifs. Now, for us, contrast means the difference inside a letter between thick parts and thin parts. Okay? The relative difference between thin and thick is what we call contrast. Remember this term because it is a very useful term for describing typefaces. And it is one of the main variables that we can adjust when we design a typeface. We can decide to design a high contrast typeface or a low contrast typeface. And they are very different to the eye. So this is one of the main variables that we can play with when we design the typeface. The other thing that is we can, okay, I have to make a correction, otherwise it will be not trivial. So let's call this thing A and B. So with reference to the point 1 and 2, we add these two other points that are contrast and serifs. Then we can have a sub-point, let's call it 2B, that is the axis. In this case, the axis is this one. Sorry, but it is too light. Okay. Essentially, what we can see here is this fact. By the way, we call the interior part of the letter, the inner contour, as the counter form or counter shape or counter punch. By the way, the term counter, written the empty part inside the letter, is often used. Now, if we observe the O in the Trajan inscription and in other inscription, we can see that the inner part of the the counter is slightly rotated in counterclockwise fashion. So if this is the vertical, the counter is slightly rotated. This is visible only when you have some amount of contrast. Otherwise, it could not be appreciated. Now, we can see this rotation of the counter or this axis, inclined axis, because the points that are thick and the points that are thin are not placed exactly in the left and right part and top and bottom, but are just a little bit rotated. Okay, so you can find the thickest part on the left bottom side and on the right upper part. And you can have the you can see the same thing for the thinnest part. Okay, then we saw the problem of serifs. that looks like serif looks like a enlargement of the base of determination of strokes. Okay, we have yet to understand why, to give an explanation for this thing, and we will explain this using the tools that were used to write the epigraphic capitals. Now, I ask you for a 5-minute break. And we will explain this thing. Okay? 5 minutes, please. Okay. No. Okay. Now, we have to explain, first of all, the presence of contrast inside letters. That is, I repeat that again, the difference between thin and thick strokes, or thin and thick parts of the letter. Now, with this explanation, we can also explain why we see this axis, rotated axis in letters. Okay. To explain this, we have to talk about the hypothesis about the process of creating graphic capitals for inscription For a long time, people believed that these letters were actually drawn on the stone using geometrical tools like a compass, a ruler, and so on and so on. So, and see, for during Renaissance, the fact people, artists mainly, tried to find a way to construct these letters in a very complicated way, because they are actually not that regular. Even if they appear regular to some extent, they are not. So the attempt to find a way to letters was an enterprise, a very hard enterprise, and the product is in some way interesting, but the letters drawn in this way are not satisfactory, because they lose all their vitality. I don't know. All that is natural. Now, the other explanation, and the explanation that we accept today, is that the process of writing on stone was actually a process of writing. So it was a two-step process. First of all, there was a artist that traced the letters with a brush, okay, with paint and brush on the stone. Then this trace was made permanent by the use of a chisel to engrave the stone. So they were not designed, but rather they were actually written with a brush. Now, this brush is a flat and thin brush. Imagine a brush like this. If you go in direction, you can leave a trace like this. This is simple. But if you go in this direction, the trace that you leave is thin, okay, because the width of the brush is thin. So, depending on the direction of the brush, you can trace a thick or thin line. That's all. You can see this scheme represented here. if you use pen, calligraphic pen, or if you ever had this experience, the pen, the so-called broad nib pen, is exactly the same. It is a metal point, usually made in this way. And with this pen, you can trace a full stroke or a very thin stroke, depending on the direction. If you go parallel to the natural direction of writing, you have a thick stroke. If you go perpendicular to the natural direction, you have a thin line. Now, this is because usually when you write, when you use the brush or the calligraphic pen, you keep a constant angle of writing. In paleographic term, they use paleographic parlance, they use the term angle of writing, and it just means that the angle that the pen form with the baseline is this angle of writing. Or writing angle, usually. Okay. Now, let's call it this alpha. Now, you keep this angle constant. You, if you want to learn calligraphy, the first thing that you have to learn is how to move the pen without changing the angle that you keep, in which you keep the pen. Okay, so in this way you have just to move without rotating the wrist. Okay, that's because what you want to obtain is exactly this. What happens when you move a tool like this on a path that is curved? If this is the path, and you keep the pen at a constant angle, like this, the trace that you leave we go from thick in this region to thin and depending on the angle that you keep your pen, the thin parts and the thick part are placed in a particular position. If you if your pen is perfectly aligned with the baseline, you obtain something like this. So the thinnest part are perfectly aligned to the vertical, and the thick parts are on the side. But this is unnatural. If you keep a pen, the position of your hand, the natural position that pen take is slightly inclined, slightly rotated, like this. Usually something like 20, 30 degrees. Now, why this is important? Because if we suppose that the artisan or the artist that wrote on the stone before the stone cutter came to make this trace permanent, and that this artist used a brush like this, it is natural that this contrast emerge. Okay, so the immersion, the fact that we see this contrast can be traced back to the use of a tool like this. Another, and we have some proof that we will see. Second, the fact that we see this tendency, this axis, okay, and the fact that we see the thickest part in certain points of letters gives us the idea that they used the brush in such a way. Also, this was for centuries the way in which we wrote. Okay, so even in medieval time and during the Renaissance, up to a certain point, we used a pen that was cut in this way. Oh. That was cut in this way, and if you study the writing of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, you can clearly see this on the manuscript. Okay. Now we have in some way explained the contrast and the rotated axis. Here in this image you can see a representation of the fact that if you trace lines with keeping the same angle, you obtain different widths for your strokes. And obviously you also have this representation letter O. You can also make this just by drawing a circle with an application like Illustrator or another vector application, applying a brush that is diagonal, and you can see obviously a shape like this. Now, the other thing we have to explain is the serif. Okay. So the other thing we have to explain is the serif. And the word serif is probably of Dutch origin. We don't know exactly what the etymology is. By the way, is the word we use to talk about the termination of strokes. Okay, now let's see what happens when you just trace a line with a brush kept at an angle, as we hypothesized. A vertical line looks like a parallelogram. This is the angle of writing. You go in this direction, and you have this line. Now, the explanation of serifs in terms of the brush was given, was described in full ways by an American monk called Edward Katich, that wrote a book named The Origin of the Serif. He came to Rome in the 30s and to study inscription, and at the end of this study he published this book called The Origin of the Serif, where he proposed a practical way to write like the Romans, to reproduce with the brush the appearance of Roman capitals. Serifs, in this way, are just the traits of exit and entering inside the stroke. So instead of just doing this movement, the writer make a movement like this, okay? So it gently exit and it gently enter inside the stroke. He also described this in terms of rotation of the brush. This rotation, so it contradicts some way what I just said about the fact that you keep the brush at a constant angle. But these rotations are are very subtle and are just made to make a better termination for strokes and curves, etc. If we take letters like I, very simple, this can be the process. Imagine that every little stroke I use is the position of the front of the brush. With one stroke, you can have this shape Then you add two other strokes. Like this. And the final shape is something like this. So, serifs, these little shapes that we see at the end of the strokes, are just a way to enter and exit from the stroke in to make letter more refined, let's say this. He gave a full explanation in this book. Here you can see a summary of all the parts that compose letters. You can, for example, see, I don't know, the left part of C and G, and you can understand that in this case the brush is kept flat at the top, then it is slightly rotated, and you can see that it's slightly rotated because it ends in this way with an angle here. But the same thing you can see the same thing in the right part of D here, where at the top you can see this little angle, acute angle, and this is the front of the brush when you start drawing. And then you can see how the different serifs and different strokes are made or they shape. Okay, so the explanation of serif is again done in terms of the brush. This hypothesis is not completely a speculation. First of all, it is good because with this technique, you can actually, if you are good, you can actually trace very good Roman capitals that look like the actual epigraphic capital of imperial times. Second, because we have example of capital letter made with brush in Roman times. We have examples because Romans used to write a lot on the walls. And you know, we have at least two cities that are well preserved, Pompeii and Ercolano, that were completely covered after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the 1st century. And the ashes of the eruption kept everything in good shape for centuries. So we have walls in Pompeii where we can see writing made with brush. Writing of all things like advertising, signs for shops, electoral slogans, and whatever. You can find a lot of writing because Romans apparently were obsessed with writing in public. Here, for example, you can see this is an old photograph of a wall of Pompeii. Unfortunately, this wall was partly destroyed during the Second World War. Today, some letters remain, but if you observe these letter R, that is quite different from the normal capital, inscriptional epigraphic capital, because in this case, these letters are very compressed, less relaxed than the normal capital, but this R was made with the brush. And you can see how the brush was used to obtain contrast, to obtain serifs here and serifs at the base. Okay? So we also have some examples of partial inscription. Stones that they started to work to make an inscription that for any reason they stopped. So we have a partial inscription with some part that is completed and another part where we only see the trace of the brush, okay, the painted letters. So we think that they made this big inscription to essentially they wrote on stone with brush, and the carving of stone was a mean to preserve this writing, to make the work of the brush permanent. In fact, after having carved letters inside the stone, again they painted them inside the cut. Okay, so that these letters were supposed to be colored. Now, okay, here, if we observe this R here, we can reconstruct how it was done. To mimic the act of writing with a brush or with a pen is to make this hatching with the pen, keeping the same angle and more or less the same width. Okay, if you do this consistently, you can mimic the pen. then you can refine and obtain your letter. But we will study this technique later. Now, why we have to take into account this explanation? Because with this explanation, we can understand we can better understand the way in which the contrast and the relative thickness of strokes is distributed along the letter and around the different letters. So you may have noticed that letters like A have a leg that is thin or relatively thin, and another leg that is relatively thick, and then you have an horizontal line that is thin again. Now, at the opposite, V has a thick stroke at the left and a thin stroke at the right. Okay, and again, you can describe every letter in this way. But to better understand how and why letters have this appearance, the best way is to think in terms of the brush, the contrast, as we have explained it before. So, if you have your brush kept at a constant angle, it's clear that lines that goes in this direction from top left to bottom right are quite thick, okay? Because they go toward the direction of maximum width of the brush. The lines, on the other hand, that goes in the direction that goes from top right to bottom left, automatically appear to be thin or relatively thin. So if you employ a technique to mimic the brush, you automatically have the contrast that we appreciate in our letters. Okay? For example, B will be done more or less in this way. And you can see that the full thickness in the top part of B is reached here, in this direction. And something like this is obtained at the bottom, where the thinnest part is reached here, in this direction. Okay, this is normal because we suppose the brush model. And again, the C can be explained in the same way. Oops. Okay, then you can have your serif. Letters like E, again, can be explained the same model. because obviously if your pen is at 20, 30 degrees, as we said before, vertical lines are thicker than horizontal lines. That's a simple geometrical construction. Okay. Okay. For me, and I think it is quite evident, it is better to understand the pattern of contrast in this term instead of a fixed model. Okay. Also, you can try and explain a completely different contrast if your hypothesis is a different writing angle. If your pen is kept at a vertical angle, you will have something like this for E. So, thick horizontals and thin verticals. And you just created a variation on the shape of these letters. And if you are consistent, you can build a variation for all the letters in a consistent way. Okay. So again, thin verticals and thick horizontals. If you go on and on, you will build the entire alphabet that will look very different from the original one because the pattern of contrast is inverted, and this alphabet will show the same structure of the previous one, but it will convey a completely different feel. Okay. That's why sometimes it's useful to think in this term, in terms of how the pattern of contrast is distributed using the model of pen of a brush. Okay, now this time really 5 minutes, and I will ask you to make some exercise to experiment with this concept. Okay, 5 minutes mean that now is 10. Okay, at 10:50, more or less, we will start our exercise.